number of sequences is not very impressive. As of this morning, there are 63,990 genomic sequences. For a country of India, this is much too small. India, so let me just tell you the numbers. If you look at the world as a whole, the total number of cases is about 225 million cases, and India is at 33 million. So roughly 1 in 8 patients are Indian. The number of genome sequences in the world is 1.2 million, and we have 60,000. So proportionately, we are way too low. So the point is that when the Delta variant occurred most people don't know that the Delta variant actually occurred in October of 2020. You people know that, but I'm talking about the general public. They don't know that. They think that it happened much later. But it started spreading from the Amravati district in about late February, early March of this year. So there are various steps involved. First step is you keep on isolating the virus from patients, and then you sequence them. And so if there is a new variant that has come, you can identify that thing. But the question is, just because it is a variant, it doesn't mean it's a variant of concern. Okay, variants are happening all the time. People ask me how many different mutations are there. I say something like 10,000. Because the virus is not going to be just automatically like a Xerox machine reproducing perfectly every time. It mutates. But not all of them are variants of concern. Okay. So there are two steps involved there. One is to test in a laboratory. Is it more infectious? The problem with those kinds of tests is that they don't translate immediately into what happens in the societal level. That is, a virus can be very infectious in a petri dish experiment, but not necessarily when human beings are transmitting, or in the other direction. Okay. So in our case, if in some part of India the disease seems to be taking off, that means there is a change in trend. We can detect that in about 8 to 10 days. That means we can tell that something is happening here. The parameters of the pandemic have now changed. Therefore, if the rate goes down, nobody is bothered. We're only bothered if the rate goes up. So we say, all right, rate seems to be going up. Why? Then you start seeing whether this is because of the presence of a new variant of the virus, or people are just throwing caution to the wind, or there is some political event or a religious event or something like that is triggering this event. So you have to do this kind of backfilling to know whether this is a one-time event that you don't have to worry about so much, or this is a fundamental shift in the nature of the pandemic. So all this kind of thing can be done, as I said, in about something like 8 to 10 days, maximum 2 weeks. That still gives the planners approximately 3 to 4 weeks from that point onward to prepare. Because every healthcare system has a certain amount of slack built into it. So long as you don't use up that slack, we are not that much worried. So yes, I think we can actually cope. I also think that going back to Murthy's point, and also Dr. Mukherjee's point, that possibly we should not be using the phrase hesitancy in India. It's more unawareness and unfamiliarity, whereas in countries like the US, it is genuine hesitancy. People see it as a matter of infringement on their fundamental rights. Okay. So I do agree with them on the education pattern. Now, our team has been working a lot with Uttar Pradesh. And there, I'm very glad for this point has been made, because most villagers did not appreciate the nature of the threat. In other words, they really didn't even think there was a pandemic. Because far from the propaganda that is in the newspapers, the actual mortality rate in UP is not that high. Okay, that's why the people refuse to believe that there was a pandemic. But if you contrast that with Uttarakhand, where the pandemic just swept through like a forest fire, there was no difficulty in convincing the people to take the vaccine. So, as Murthy has said, once I understand the need to take this thing, as a society we don't hesitate very much. Okay. So, anyway, to give a short answer to your question, I think we can give the planners about 3 to 4 weeks lead time. in case there is a mutant of interest. There is an interesting set of papers I have read, which I don't fully understand just yet, which is that, okay, you have this vaccine, so the virus is trying to mutate to escape the vaccine. But there is another important aspect in biology which is called the fitness. Fitness is whether this mutated virus can actually survive in the human body. And these two papers I have seen, they were suggesting that the coronavirus is now practically at the limit of its fitness, meaning that if you try to mutate still more in order to escape the existing set of vaccines, it will not be survivable inside the human body. So this is a hypothesis, but one worth tracking, because it means that we should not go on propagating these doomsday scenarios just to scare people. Now, but this is obviously an experimental paper, and these people in the life sciences are far more knowledgeable than I am, but we do read that literature. I just want to make one last point with your permission and answer a question that you didn't ask. So, one of the features of the Sutra model is what is called the undetection factor. That is, for every case that you test positive, how many other cases are there? Now, these gentlemen would know whether it was the first wave or the second wave. Amongst the people who tested positive, RT-PCR, about 80% were asymptomatic. Only around 20% required follow-up care. So the distinction is not between symptomatic versus asymptomatic. It's between tested positive and undetected. There are people out there. And our model shows that for every one person who tests positive, there are between 32 to 36 other people out there who have not been detected. Now, I want to make one important point to the journalists who are sitting here. Please do not confuse undetected with unreported. Unreported means somebody knows about it and is suppressing the information. We are not saying that at all. We are saying undetected, meaning even the people themselves don't know that they are infected. But that's how the herd immunity builds up. So you take the total number of cases in India, which is something like 33 million, multiply by this undetection factor, and you get close to a billion. That's where your 70% seropositivity rate comes. The point, of course, about the latest ICMR survey, they included children above the age of 6 for the first time. And it was a shock to everybody that, exactly, so the shock was that children had as many antibodies, almost, as adults. So the point is that we should, and our undetectation ratio also includes children. Not that only adults are included. I think, if time is going to permit, I will come back to you. I have a couple of more important questions to ask, but before that, let me move on to Deepak. Deepak, what we have seen is this, of course, this is a calamity for the world, but this calamity also has given opportunity in certain business areas, especially the vaccines, to have a kind of, if I may have to say, a windfall, right? Not all the companies, but especially the major players. Do you think this kind of windfall, right, if I may have to say so, is going to motivate many other players to come into the fray, to develop newer and newer vaccines and newer technologies and newer platforms in order to deal with the future public health emergencies of this kind, especially the zoonotic infection?
Thanks. First a quick comment on the zoonotic infection. I believe that zoonotic infections are a consequence of an extremely unsustainable way of life that's going on. When you destroy forests, when you cut trees, the species that are living there have no option but to migrate to some other place. When species migrate, there is a possibility that there is a risk of transmission which gets increased. So I think that is at a more fundamental philosophical level, but without getting into that, I just wanted to make that remark. To your second question on would it prompt more people to do vaccines, would it prompt more people to work on this? Absolutely. And the kind of intense activity that I've seen from people in the industry, especially over the last 18 to 20 months, is unbelievable in terms of the number of people who have got interested, the number of collaborations that have happened, the number of cross-border joint projects that are ongoing. It's just an unprecedented number which has never happened in the past. The second thing which has happened is that the rate at which people have developed vaccines and also medicine, I think the rate of development has increased very substantially. The third thing which has happened is even governments and regulators have been more open about using more evidence from clinical side as well as from the real world to look at ways in which the access to vaccines can be accelerated. So I think all of these factors are very, very important factors which have helped the world to get reasonably good semblance of a solution in a short period of time. Otherwise, the average time it would take to develop a vaccine prior to COVID was 10 years. From 10 years, we are down to less than a year. And that is something which is a consequence of this multi-stakeholder effort that's been ongoing. And for sure, it will prompt more and more people to come up with more and more, I would say, innovative technologies, more and more usage of certain things which have got unlocked. For example, the mRNA has got unlocked. Now we're talking of the DNA plasmid platform. We're talking of several other platforms. I think that unlocking will open the way for a lot more innovation space.
Just a follow-up question before we open the session for the press. Very quick answer. We all know by now that vaccines are really saving lives, right? We see the number of people who are protected from the disease and also from mortality. There is a very significant number. World Health Organization gives that number as 2 million lives which are saved every year thanks to vaccines, right? And also it has got a huge economic side of it, right? Where for example, if you look at MERS and SARS, probably they would have costed something like 30-40 billion to the economy, and now we are estimating the current COVID-19 to have an impact of 3 trillion to 4 trillion to the world economy. From that perspective, we know that the currently available vaccines themselves would not be sufficient in order to reach out to every person on this earth. Number one. Number two, probably they are, for some countries they are too expensive also. Do you think there are going to be much more frugal, much more economical, much more easily deployable vaccines coming into the scene very soon? And if they are, what kind of newer vaccines, needle-free vaccines, which probably we can expect?
So I think the most important component here is scale. The moment you have scale, you have the ability to bring the cost down. And it is scale which is of paramount importance at this point in time. I believe that the world is getting towards a point where, as far as COVID vaccines are concerned, we are reaching a stage. Today, if you look at it, the price that a person has to pay from the pocket or the price at which a government is procuring the vaccine varies from anywhere $2.50 to, let's say, $37 per shot. That's the variation around the world. But I think the lower end of the spectrum is really a number which gives us hope that everywhere in the world there is a possibility to get to those levels, maybe even lower. And that is what will enable a much larger proportion of the world to get vaccinated. There are some of these efforts ongoing like COVAX, many of you are aware, but I think a lot more needs to be done in terms of actual scaling up and actual availability of the vaccine, and that is the only way we'll be able to provide a much larger coverage.
Thank you very much. I'm anxious to ask more questions to my panelists because it is really electrifying the kind of replies what we get, and they address issues which are burning, not something theoretical, philosophical, or some ambiguous questions, but they are the questions which can make a difference to the people in terms of how they are going to adapt to the new reality. So from that perspective, I have many questions, but I would rather stop here and open the session to the press so that you can also actually ask those questions which are out there in the public and bring it to the fore. Thank you. I'm very hesitant to comment about Kerala because essentially the government has been very defensive. Whenever somebody points out that they actually need to get their act together, they don't seem to like it very much. In fact, Last week I gave a talk at IIT Madras and somebody asked me an anonymous question, the same question you asked now. And I said it was only a joke, but not entirely. I said you have the luxury of asking an anonymous question, but I don't have the luxury of giving an anonymous answer. So I think it's better that I don't go there at all. Just to tell you the situation, number of active cases in Kerala as of this morning, 1.98 lakhs. Maharashtra, 49,000 and change. Number 3, Tamil Nadu, 16,000 and change. So, Kerala, Maharashtra, everybody else is way below. So, when we try to apply modeling techniques to the Kerala pandemic, what we find is that the parameters are drifting way too much. So, this happens when the numbers are not totally reliable. Okay. And also the other point is that in the case of Kerala, yesterday they tested 1.1 lakh people and 16,000 positive tests. That means the test positivity ratio is 15% approximately. Normally when you have a high test positivity ratio, you expand. And as you keep expanding, the ratio comes down and comes down. And eventually once it hits some level like 3 to 5%, you say, okay, that is enough. So the conclusion is when a state has 16% test positivity ratio, you have to wonder how many more cases there are that are undetected. Okay. Now the argument that the Kerala government gives is that they do focus testing based on contact tracing. I don't have a way of validating this claim. I'm only telling you what they say. Alright. But nevertheless, it is not sustainable for the country as a whole when a state that is 2.5% of the population reports 75% of the cases. It just is not sustainable. Now the thing is, health is a state subject in India. So the central government has very, very limited room for maneuver other than giving advice. So it seems to me that the neighboring states, Tamil Nadu, which is to the east, and Karnataka, which is to the north, they just have to make sure that the cases do not spread to their state. Other than that, I don't know what else one can do. I think Kerala essentially has to let the pandemic work its way through society. How long that will take, we do not know. The other point, as my two colleagues have mentioned, is about vaccination. Once they hit about 75% of adults getting both doses of the vaccine, then you can potentially talk about the pandemic winding down simply because there are no more people left to infect in some sense. Okay. Now, I have not done a projection to know when that date will be, but you can do the projection yourself using publicly available information, or perhaps one of you have done that projection, so please share it. But till that happens, which may be a few months from now, I do think the situation in Kerala will look like this. Okay. It might not be sustaining at 30,000 cases per day, because as we start approaching the 75% mark, the number of cases will also gradually come down. So that is what I foresee for Kerala.
I have a small counterpoint to that regarding Kerala. See, Kerala, the numbers have been high, and yesterday they have reported almost 50% of the cases in India, reported around 30,000 cases were reported in India. Now, the problem is, if we blame the Kerala government, we will miss the point. Why? Because you take restrictions in Telangana, you take the restrictions in Andhra Pradesh or Karnataka or any other place in India. Do you think that the Kerala people are so not following the COVID appropriate behavior, or are we following the COVID appropriate behavior so much better than them? I think that is not the case. Here we are celebrating the festivals much more. We are meeting much more, and in fact Kerala is reporting higher number of cases. And I don't mean to say that the Kerala government has to be given credit for that also. They are claiming credit. That is wrong. They are saying that because we have higher number of vaccinations, because we control the first two waves better, because our second wave started later than the other states, that's why our cases. They cannot claim credit. They have a problem and they have to acknowledge it. But at the same time, if we think that if we can put the complete blame on the Kerala government, we will miss the point. What I mean to say is, I wrote to IGID Chief Vinod Skarya saying that if such a thing is happening, there has to be a viral variant that is causing the problem. Now, human behavior more or less has been the same across India. The government restrictions have been more or less the same or more or less more in Kerala. Like in Telangana, we don't have any restrictions at all. Still the case load is higher. So, it has to be something to do with the viral variant. And then they have, when I asked what they have told is, Delta plus variant, the AY12 is the predominant variant that is spreading in Kerala, which is the similar strain which is there in Israel also. So now what we have to do is we have to increase the genetic testing in Kerala ASAP, and then we have to find out if the new variant is coming. If the new variant is coming, again we are going to have another wave. So we have to be careful about that, number one. Number two, is it the end of the second wave that is happening or the beginning of the third wave that is happening in Kerala? We have to make sure. And then no amount of prediction is possible there. But there is a scientifically validated method to decide that. What we need to do is, you do the RT-PCR testing, let us say in 1,10,000 patients, and then we have to calculate the CT value in those RT-PCR tests. The average CT value will give you whether a wave is ending or a wave is beginning. Because in the wave, if the wave is beginning, the average CT value would fall suddenly, and then if the wave is ending, the CT value will rise up. This is a study done by National Institute of Health in USA. So this is the data that the state government is already having. So what they need to do is, they should analyze and then tell us where we stand. That's what I mean.
Any other question? Well, just to reinforce what Dr. Mukherjee said, first of all, the director of IGID is a member of the situation. Dr. Anwar Agarwal, you know, I spoke to Vinod, when Vinod is reports to Anwar, yeah. So we are right on top of that situation. There are 5 people in the super team, he is one of them. If you look at the Infosat database, you can see that the B1.617.2, which is the so-called Delta Plus variant, has been replaced by the AY4 variant. Okay. Today it constitutes 45% of cases there, and 45% are the B1.617.2. On the other hand, Kerala has the second largest number of sample sequence, next only to Maharashtra. So they are getting their share of testing. So I think the question is what they are doing about it. So they have to do something. I don't necessarily know what, but they are not at the end of the second wave. They are in the middle of the second wave. Maharashtra is at the end of the second wave. The rest of India, second wave is over. And I say that very confidently. If you go back to July 1st, the rest of India, excluding Maharashtra and Kerala, had 20,000 cases daily. August 1st, it came down to 15,000 cases. September 1st, it came down to 10,000 cases. I'm giving round numbers, don't take them very, very literally. So the rest of India, like this. 10,000 cases for India minus these 2 states is essentially the end of the wave. Maharashtra had come down to something like 10,000, now they're down to 5,000, something like that. So you can say the second wave has not ended in Maharashtra, but it is ending. Kerala, you have to be very careful not to look at daily numbers. The reason is because there is a weekly pattern. Okay, on Sunday and Monday you see very low number of cases reported, because on Saturday and Sunday not very many tests are conducted. So Tuesday through Friday is when you get the real picture. Okay, so there were around 30,000 cases per day earlier in terms of the moving average. Now they seem to have come down somewhat, and this is the point that I was making, that as vaccination builds up in Kerala, this number will come down. And as and when they hit about 75%, then they will finally see the end of the current wave. Now, as far as we are able to determine from talking to IGID, they do not seem to have a more infectious variant. They just seem to have a different variant. So, I mean, one has to, I guess I'm saying the same thing as Dr. Mukherjee in slightly different language. You cannot evade responsibility by saying we have a different variant, by saying that we're doing more targeted testing. You start by admitting that you have a problem. Then ask experts like this, what should we be doing? Then only then you will start towards finding a solution. I'm sorry I'm being very blunt.
Well, probably you would be in a better position to about the it's not just IT, maybe a lot of the offices that people are. See, what happens is there is apprehension still. Let us be very mindful of the fact that apprehension is not disappeared, and apprehension is amongst all of us. This weekend I'm traveling to London. There is an apprehension how things would be. It doesn't mean that I stop doing an activity. You talked about how do you come back to normal. You come back to normal by acting normal with some sort of apprehension in your mind and how you're going to fight that apprehension. Not by sitting at home. Since schools, when you're looking at the IT crowd, you just find usually that both partners are employed, right? When both partners are employed and schools are not open, you are not getting domestic help. So what would be their big question mark? Who's going to look after the child? Who's going to take leave today? So for them, the day-to-day worries are about how do we manage schools as well as work. If the schools are open, and I think this is very important, when you look at the data which Vidyasagar Garu referred to or Dr. Mukherjee referred to, about the ICMR survey, and more than 50% of children in the age group of 6 to 12 also having antibodies, it means children have already got infected at home. Forget school, they're already getting infected. Don't blame it on the school. And isolated cases, when schools are reopened, isolated cases will occur. Even if schools are not reopened, isolated cases will have occurred. That is not going to stop. So if you want things to move towards employment footfalls increasing in the offices, whether IT or anything, schools are an integral part of that. Most of us are nuclear families now, not joint families. So there are life pressures, which is why people are hesitating, along with the apprehension, because we are still part of the process of COVID evolution. With nothing available, the 1914-18, do we call it Spanish flu, actually originated in England, not in Spain. It took 4 years, even though it spread very rapidly, there was nothing else to protect people. So herd immunity would have been achieved much faster, but it still did not prevent it from going from Spain. A lot of people don't know that 2 million people died in Mumbai during 1914-18 flu, which was never reported because not archived in that sense. So if you have to make a difference, all segments of society have to function together as a wholesome component. Schools, education have to go together. Entertainment, whether you open pubs or not, is immaterial. Let me be very honest. Whether you open malls or not is immaterial. Because you don't want social interaction to such an extent. With the rest of it, employment and education have to go hand in hand. Then things will change. Otherwise, it will not change.
The vaccine for the under 18 population, I think, is a very, very important aspect of this whole equation. Until that comes in a manner that it is substantial, the kind of numbers, the kind of percentages we are talking about for the adult population, at least in my view, it will not only have an impact in terms of greater coverage, but also psychologically in terms of giving comfort to the parent and to the child that I am safe when I go to school. So I think that's just one thing to add to what you said.
Thank you. Any other questions?
So
Yes.
why do we require different vaccines for under 18 population?
Do you require
Why
different
do we
vaccines?
require different
So
vaccines?
it's not about a different vaccine, it's about what is the dose at which you need to. You need to titrate the dose. A 2-year-old child and an 8-year-old child and a 15-year-old child need different levels of dosing. And maybe a 15-year-old child also needs something different from an 18-year-old adult. So that is why you need to be very, very careful in terms of the dose ranging studies, in terms of how you're calibrating the dose, in terms of how you're doing the clinical trials. This is extremely important because the last thing you want is that it has an unintended negative effect.
Absolutely. Any, yeah, please.
People are coming out with nasal and oral vaccines also now. A lot of experiments are being carried out. How this is different from normal injection and then this type of dosage?
This question is for
Maybe that's
See, there are no, there are intranasal vaccines that are coming up. The intranasal vaccine is being tested with Bharat Biotech now. So that results will be complete in the next couple of months, and we need to see how the results work. And regarding oral vaccines, that's an important point. Actually, there is a company called Vaxart in the United States, which has completed the phase 1 and phase 2 trials regarding this oral vaccine. It would have been wonderful because if you take a pill and then if you get protected, that would have been wonderful. But unfortunately, that phase 1, phase 2 trials have fallen behind the primary endpoint. They did not protect as well. So the company decided not to take it further. But they had generated good amount of cell-mediated immunity, but antibodies they did not generate enough. That's why they did not want to take it forward. So oral vaccines right now they are not available. Intranasal vaccines, apart from Bharat Biotech, a couple of other companies are also trying, not in India, outside. So ultimately, an intranasal vaccine, the appeal is it will prevent the infection rather than some antibodies which are there in the body. If you have an intranasal vaccine through which the virus is entering the body, so the epithelial IgE, if it is more, it will prevent the infection. That is the appeal of that vaccine. Transmission, infection and transmission. So that is the appeal of those vaccines. And then the new Zycovid which is coming, this is not an injection as well. That is a different platform of given. And that is a DNA vaccine which can be given intradermally. It is a totally painless thing. But 3 doses have to be given. And the efficacy seems to be around 67%, which we are not certain because the third phase results are not into the public domain yet. They have submitted the data to DCGA, got approval, but we don't have the hands-on about the data, so we cannot talk about it.
Yeah, I think just adding on to what Dr. Mukherjee said, the needle-free vaccine, whether it is oral or any other route, it significantly reduces actually the logistic issues and also the vaccine hesitancy itself. There are a lot of people are scared about the needle, and we also know from the past experience from our polio eradication, it would not have been possible without a oral polio vaccine coming into the picture, right? So from that point, it is very significant that we get vaccines which are needed.
Now, as per the discussions, by end of 2021, second dose also is getting over for as far as India is concerned. So what happens afterwards for this vaccine manufacturing companies?
I think that is too difficult. So,
Let me answer first on the from the perspective of Indian vaccine manufacturers, and then we'll. So as far as Indian vaccine manufacturers are concerned, I believe India will be the vaccine capital of the world, a vaccine manufacturing capital of the world as far as COVID vaccines are concerned. So there is a coverage which is going to happen in India. There is still a very large population outside India which is left uncovered. We shared some data in the course of these discussions. That's point number 1. Point number 2, even today, we don't know whether you need to have boosters, you need to have repeats. Nobody knows. In a country like Israel, 30% of the population has taken their third shot. And 30% of the population has not taken even one shot on account of hesitancy or various issues. So there are all these issues which are unique to every part of the world which will have to be addressed. And what will happen to vaccine manufacturers? I think there are plenty of public health concerns that are going to continue to remain and stay. And therefore, for a vaccine manufacturer which is able to produce vaccines at scale, make them affordable, make them accessible, there will always be a good requirement in terms of the number of people who will need those vaccines.
Thank you very much, Deepak. I think since the paucity, because of the paucity of time, I think we cannot continue with this. But what is coming very clearly is that the vaccination strategy is the cheapest policy path in order to handle the current pandemic. The vaccines which are available are safe. The vaccine hesitancy is a myth which probably has to be blown out. And more information and also incentivization is going to make, if there is any, that vaccine hesitancy to be blown out. So with that note, and also the Professor Vidyasagar mentioned that we are already out of second wave, and probably even if there is going to be any third wave, it is going to be insignificant. I think with that good note, thank you very much to all of you for attending this session and also raising your questions. Thank you. Now I request Mr. Sambit to take over.